Hello all, Jack Scarlett here, fully charged resident car nerd, and welcome to my very first podcast. Okay, it's kind of a cheat because it's not actually a podcast, it is in fact a recording of one of the talks that I chaired at Fully Charged Live this past summer, but it is a very good one. The subject of discussion is the scalability of infrastructure for commercial EVs, not the most sexy topic in the entire world, I grant you, but an incredibly important one if this whole electric revolution is going to happen in a big way. And joining me on the stage was Imogen Pierce of Arrival, although she's actually started her own company since, Ian Johnston from Osprey Energy, and Niall Riddell from Paua. Before we begin, a quick thank you to our wonderful sponsors, My Energy. Enjoy the chat.
My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy, driving the charge to a greener future.
Hello, how you guys doing? Thank you for being here today. This talk is called, that's not the title of this talk is called The Scalability of Commercial EV Infrastructure, which if we're being brutally honest is probably not the sexiest title of a talk this weekend, but it is a very important topic and a very interesting one. As I'm sure that you're all aware, electric cars are kind of catching on these days. They're kind of a big deal. But one of the ongoing gripes and one of the things that people often cite as their reason for not wanting to go electric is the charger network. But what about commercial EVs? What about all these electric lorries and buses that are popping up? Where are we charging those? And is the charging network for them growing fast enough? I have no idea, but fortunately there are some people here who should have some intelligent answers to these questions. Let me introduce them to you. First of all, we have Niall Riddell on the far end here.
Hey Jack.
How you doing, mate? Neil is a bit of a veteran of the renewable energy game, but most recently he's the co-founder of Paua, a company on a mission to streamline the charging experience by unifying lots of different charging networks into one app. Basically means you don't need a million different apps and a million different cards in your pocket. And Neil, on behalf of everyone here who owns a non-Tesla electric car, thank you.
That's all right, we're working hard on it.
Appreciate it. Then we have Ian Johnston. How you doing, mate?
Afternoon all. Thank you for having me. Our
pleasure. Ian is the CEO of Osprey, one of the UK's fastest growing charging networks. Again, veteran of the renewable energy game. And before that was in the automotive space with VW Group. And finally, we have Imogen Pierce of Arrival.
Hello.
Hello. Imogen, well, Arrival, we'll start with Arrival. As I'm sure many of you know, the creators of these state-of-the-art electric vans and buses, both of which are going into production next year, I believe, both of which have tens of thousands of pre-orders already. And Imogen, in her role as Head of City Engagement and Integration.
Nailed it.
Yes! Liaises with cities around the world, particularly in the US at the moment, to better understand the pathway to sustainable urban transportation. And yes, Imogen, I stole that line from your LinkedIn page. Okay, so I think we're going to kick things off with a nice general question, and I'm going to start with you, Ian. What is the current state of the commercial EV infrastructure in the UK, and where is it at compared to the sort of public charging network?
I think if we're being very honest about, if you took a snapshot of the infrastructure that's out there today, and is it sufficient to allow all the UK's fleets to transition, the very honest answer is no. But if you look at the rollouts that are taking place from the charging networks like Osprey and others, if you look at the technology that's coming to the market, even today, the new charging technology on the stands, if you look at the rollouts from the major landlords that are happening now in this post-pandemic 2021, it's definitely happening and it's there. I think the biggest difference when you look at the commercial fleets is the requirement for certainty of availability of charging. So we're beyond, with the established networks we have, we're beyond the early stage issues of does the charger work? Can I access the charger? Are there payment solutions? Now it's down to, are the sites of a sufficient scale, accessibility, power? So what you're seeing from the major networks today are huge advancements in terms of those sites that will give fleets the certainty that they can make the transition and their drivers can then get a charge when they need it. Because today, what the commercial fleets are telling us is, well, we need our drivers to charge at home because historically we haven't been able to trust the public charging networks. That's changing today.
Imogen, I know that you guys at Arrival have had no problem flogging the buses and vans that are coming out next year, lots of pre-orders. Have you experienced any sort of cold feet from potential buyers who are keen to buy your products but uncertain about how they're going to go about keeping them charged up?
Well, as I'm sure you've experienced in your line, like the first concern that comes up is around cost, range, and availability of charging infrastructure. And the other thing is about fleet charging is that you have your like almighty massive fleets like your UPSs of the world, and for them, upgrading their depots or sort of, implementing their charging infrastructure is a reasonably straightforward task. But then equally, you have fleets who maybe have between 10 to 30 vehicles, and you've got a combination of people charging at home, charging in a depot, charging out on the streets, so that introduces a bit more complexity. And then, of course, you have your other fleets, like your electric Uber and Lyft drivers. And then when you look at, well, how many of these people have off-street parking? And it's probably only about 25%. And so suddenly you need to ensure that these people can not only charge their vehicles, but in a way that isn't adding like another hour onto your day or introducing faff, or that you're having to, employees are having to pay their employees whilst their vehicle is charging. So I think from our side, we have a real responsibility to showcase the pathway to get there and to minimize that fear and anxiety at every single juncture.
Neil, I guess one of the huge challenges that specifically faces sort of commercial charging networks is power, right? Because if you're looking to charge 20 electric buses in one depot overnight, the power demands are absurd. How do we tackle that? How do we deal with that?
It's a great question, and one of the reasons that we are advocating that fleets consider public charging as part of their ecosystem. As we've kind of talked through and Imogen's highlighted some of the key points, there's a home charging opportunity. It's amazing. You charge at home overnight, it's full when you get up. There's a depot charging opportunity. Your vans stay there overnight. That's great for those guys. But for some people taking their fleets home at night, they have to park on the street. Public charging becomes part of that ecosystem. If you're running a bus, a big bus depot, I had the privilege of working on a bus depot, Northumberland Park, central London, the largest electric bus depot in London. They're bringing in a huge amount of power. So they're putting in megawatt-style charging with hundreds of chargers rolled out across that site now to enable the buses to charge. But they've got a really predictable pattern. So what we discover quite quickly is that commercial vehicles range from the butcher's van, which goes home every night because he's got one van, through to these multi-vehicle bus depots, through to lease companies that effectively own thousands of vehicles. So defining a commercial fleet is quite an interesting thing. And it's always worth remembering that, 80% of new vehicles coming to the market are sort of financed somehow. Someone owns that behind them. Very few are bought new. So there's a lot of nuance around what a commercial fleet looks like. And there's a lot of different solutions required for each of the different fleet types.
That's an interesting point you make about the fact that the public charging network and this sort of commercial EV charging infrastructure are not two separate issues, right? Because you can't charge a double-decker bus on the end of your road at a plug-in point, but a lot of vehicles are perfectly small and can rely on the public charging network. So they're not two completely separate issues. And as one gets better, it's going to get easier for everyone. I'd be keen to hear from any and or all of you about an example of some place that's doing it really well at the moment. Is there an example somewhere in the world of EV commercial charging done right?
So I'm going to jump in very quickly because we've recently partnered with the guys at Osprey, so we spent quite a bit of time commissioning those chargers and trialing their sites. You visit an Osprey site, you can see it, you can find it. So visibility is really important. The last thing you need is to drive into a large car park and get lost in an obscure corner. So I like visibility. The guys at Fastnet do that. You can't miss those yellow arrows. The visibility is a starting point. Then when you get there, what's the actual bay, the space look like? Is it dark and unlit? When you get the really well lit, really well located locations, amenities, you're going to be there 20 minutes, half an hour, toilets, cafes, those things all become hugely important. So people like the likes of Osprey, Instavolt, GridServe, Fastnet, there's a number of them now that are really thinking this through and producing some really cool kit.
It's a very good answer and an excellent plug as well, may I say. I don't know if you caught that, guys. Who's doing it right? Us. Ian, Imogen, any further thoughts?
Well, I think, sorry. There are two examples that I can think of, actually. So you mentioned a little bit about how commercial fleets can really, really understand how they use their fleets. Quite often, mileage or routes are really, really predictable. And under the Biden administration, there is an enormous push for electric school buses. And for some electric school bus routes, that absolutely makes sense. It's completely feasible to do that route to and from in one day on one charge. And for other routes, there and back is not possible. So some fleets are looking at, well, does one bus do the long route in the morning and the short one in the afternoon and swap with another one? So I think there's some really good examples in that sphere of, understanding your usage and your routes a bit better. But the second one, and this is hot off the press, I read this today, there is a company called Just Park, and they have released something called Fleet Charge, I think. And basically, it's a peer-to-peer charging network. So if I'm a van driver, I can't charge my van on my drive overnight. I can find a local business with a charge point within a 5-minute walk of my home. And I think that is really cool. That is like the Airbnb charging network, I think.
I think actually, whilst technically what the sites are required to do, whether it's a commercial fleet or the general public, is the same, I think the environment, things like the amenities, are actually quite different. I mean, Mr. and Mrs. Smith are not going to want to drive into the back of an industrial park, but there are many, many fleets that would have no issue, and that's probably where they spend their time anyway. So I think if you look at the work that some of the bus companies are doing, like Fleet and others, First Bus, where they're securing huge slugs of power, big grid connections, and that creates options then to work with other charging user cases. I think there's real opportunity there to do a lot more than just the primary usage.
I think another interesting opportunity that arises from these enormous battery-powered electric commercial vehicles is vehicle-to-loads type stuff. What we end up with is these enormous battery packs that we can sort of use as chargers for other things. Neil, could you talk to us a little bit about that, sort of the immense possibilities of what we can do with these huge dormant electric vehicles that a lot of the time are actually just sitting there doing nothing, full of charge?
Yeah, it's a hugely exciting opportunity. The largest storage facility we have in the UK today is Norwich, which is the electric mountain. It's a mountain that's hollowed out and full of hydro reservoir. There's as much battery power in the UK's electric vehicle fleet as there is in Norwich today. So it's about 9 gigawatt hours of stored power. And you kind of look at that and you go, well, there's this huge chunk of stored energy. Surely we should do something with it. Then you get down to the more micro scale and you go, well, okay, someone's got an electric car at home. How do you enable that? Vehicle to grid at home as a commercial case is coming. There's a number of parties doing it. The Octopus Power Loop project, the guys at Indra. There's some cool stuff out there, but it's quite a hard business case to work, and you've got to make sure that it's super slick and super easy for the customer. Previously, I looked at a role doing vehicle to grid with buses, bus to grid. Great opportunity, predictable patterns, but the layers of complexity, the technical evolution that's required in that space is still very significant. So lots and lots of opportunity, but I still think we need to refine how that's going to work for the consumer, because at the end of the day, we love tech. Most of the people sat in this room are listening to commercial infrastructure because they think infrastructure is cool. Infrastructure is cool. But the reality is the 99% of people yet to adopt this, they want to go see their loved ones. They want to do a job. They want to deliver parcels. They don't really care about this. So whatever we do, we've got to get that consumer experience, be it public charging or vehicle to grid, to an absolutely A1 level so that people could just do it.
Something I'd be interested in hearing potentially a little bit from each of you on. In terms of the priority of sort of the adoption of commercial electric vehicles, the adoption of privately owned electric vehicles, do you see one as being more important than the other now? Do you think we need to hurry up and get all the buses and lorries electric and then we start thinking about passenger vehicles? Is there no right answer to this? What are your thoughts?
Well, so if you purely think about it from a numbers game, I think commercial vehicles, and I'm definitely going to get this wrong, so if you have a correct answer, correct me. I think commercial vehicles represent about 8% of the total number of vehicles in the UK. But in terms of the total vehicle miles travelled, they're a much, much bigger proportion. And so, for example, say most people do about 12,000 miles a year, a commercial vehicle will do at least sort of 60,000. And so as a percentage of your contribution to emissions, it's enormous. And also if you're driving delivery vehicles past schools, past businesses, in town centres, again, you know, there's an enormous exposure to poor air quality that's going on. The second bit is that for some people, transitioning a private personal vehicle to electric is an enormous pressure. Vehicles are still expensive, and I think, you know, putting the pressure on commercial vehicles, particularly public transit networks and vans, is a way for more people to experience the benefits of electric vehicles without that initial financial pressure, such that, you know, we can get the real technological innovation in that sector, such that when people are able to transition, it's a much easier step to do so.
I think if you take a step back from our commercial objectives as well and think about why we're here, with the mission to stop burning stuff, if you only have to walk down Oxford Street and the buses and the vans and the delivery vehicles, I think that's where the most urgent need is for us to make a real change, you know, to make a real dent in the pollution and the climate crisis we have. So it's a harder one to solve, but it's being done. I don't want the takeout to be it's a challenge, because if you look at the example of the likes of DPD, who in January last year had, I think it was 150 electric vehicles. And if I said, what do you think would be a good number to have by the end of this year? You might say, well, double it. But they're going to have 1,700 vehicles by November. So some of the biggest fleets in the country are doing this today, where it needs to be done, in the towns and cities, outside the schools, on the high street. So I think in terms of the need, yes, there's definitely a need with buses and vans. It just needs a bit more thought, and it needs more coordination between where the power is and what can we use that power for.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to jump in and add a little bit of a bend on this one, because every fleet is different. They do very high miles. You know, there's some guys who are doing 18, 20, 30,000 miles a year. The risk is that a lot of commercial fleets have looked at the public charging ecosystem and said it's too hard. So they start with the depot, they start with home charging, and then they look at public and go, we're not going to electrify, we're going to avoid public charging. And we've had conversations with a number of fleets who've deliberately said, we're not doing public, it's too complex, too hard, we just can't do it. And to some extent, that's why we exist, because we want to make it easier in that public domain, because it will have the biggest climate impact. And ultimately, as Ian says, if you step back, we're here because we want to decarbonise transport. And if we can provide tools and technology that make it easier for people to do that, that's exactly why we exist.
Imogen, I think I'm right in saying that UPS have got an order for a good 10,000 of your vans and potentially another 10,000 if the first 10,000 are good?
Yep, that's correct.
Not bad. In general, have you found that there is a really significant appetite from companies like that to go electric, and it's actually just the kind of logistical side that are giving them cold feet?
To be honest, I don't think we're even finding the cold feet. You know, all of the evidence suggests that you've got lower maintenance, lower total cost of ownership. You know, you're going to take advantage of various government incentives. You can have your charging network. It is a no-brainer decision. And as sort of the technology innovations persist, those costs are going to come down, and your total cost of ownership is going to get even better. I think then the other thing that's quite exciting for those sort of logistics businesses as well is that there's not a tremendous amount of certainty on what the residual value is, but what we can be certain of, it's probably going to be higher than your, you know, internal combustion engine vehicle. So from a commercial standpoint, they're like, sweet, no-brainer, like, sign us up. And the challenge that we have at Arrival is that sort of like, whoa, we're not in full-scale production yet, please be patient. And yeah, I just can't wait to see our vehicles on the road, really.
Okay, here's the big one. I'm now going to charge you all with solving the problems of the world and figuring out all of our problems here on this stage. What needs to happen that isn't currently? What needs to change significantly in the next couple of years in order for this infrastructure to continue growing or to grow faster?
So I think that there is not a problem about there being enough money, that we don't need government funding or public money. There's hundreds of millions of pounds of committed capital to do it. There's the technology, there's the intelligence. What you need to deliver a brilliant charging hub is power and land. The power's there, it's freeing up the land. And there are only certain parties that own land. Many of them are local authorities, and many of them are large nationwide or global businesses. So we're starting to see major contracts being offered for for the creation of charging infrastructure, but there's so much more land and so many more car parks that aren't being opened up yet. These people are sat there thinking, we need to work out what is our role in this infrastructure space. And the government and the powers that be need to accelerate that process, because if we can have a huge activity of tenders, if every local authority ran a tender for its town centre car parks and every local town centre had a charging hub, it would change the face of charging in the UK. So the money's there, the power's there, the tech's there, the land needs to be opened up and accelerated.
I'm going to take you guys' answers in a second, but just very quickly, it's really interesting to hear you say the power is there, because that's always cited as this kind of, oh, but we don't have, do you have any idea how many megawatts we need to charge this? It's there, isn't it? We just need to figure out a way of using it intelligently and connecting people with where that power is available.
Yeah, you can't pick and choose. You can't say, I want a hub here. You have to create the hub where the power is. But there's a HV network across the UK. That's where you need to build these hubs for everybody: passenger cars, commercial vehicles, vans.
All right, come on then, Neil, save the world. What have you got for me?
I've got you the granny test. So the big thing for me is that we're at 1%. We're very early in this market. We've deployed 1% of the infrastructure. We deployed 1% of the vehicles. We're starting to see the early signs of mass adoption. And we need to learn from that 1%. We need to look backwards and go, what works, what doesn't work? And then we need to solve the granny test. When your granny gets an electric car, will she understand it? People understand pence per litre, just. Kilowatt hours, kilowatts, people are still mixing them up. Even the people who sell the vehicles mix up kilowatts and kilowatt hours. How do we help them with this new lingo and language? How do we make it easier? How do we be insanely customer focused? So that customer focus will enable us to solve the granny test. Can your granny lift up a 150 kilowatt charging cable? They're physically heavy. Is she going to be able to navigate around the curbstone and find out which part of the car to stick it in? When it doesn't come out, what does she do? How do we make it really super easy? So one of the cool pieces of tech we're tinkering with at the moment is plug and charge. The ability to just plug your vehicle in and charging starts automatically. And we think that's super cool because it just takes one more step out of the equation. Wireless charging with plug and charge, you just drive to the right spot and stop your car. That sounds awesome. So there's a lot of cool tech we can still work on and explore to make this really, really consumer-obsessed, consumer-focused.
And just before we take Imogen's answer, you've piqued my curiosity there. Talk to me a little bit about wireless charging. Is that, how far off are we? Is that in development?
You're asking the wrong person. There's probably someone out here who can answer it. The nice thing about wireless charging is it becomes super easy. And there are people the government's kindly put some money towards innovations in this space, particularly things like taxi ranks. But the standardization question tends to be the one that gets you. So how do you ensure that you've got that beautiful standardized experience? I am not an automotive manufacturer, but they tell me there's a few of them out there and they all do things slightly differently. So finding a way to harmonize is going to probably be the biggest barrier to wireless charging, but I don't claim to be an expert. It is cool tech though.
Imogen, what needs to change significantly in the next couple of years in order to allow the charging infrastructure to carry on growing at this rate or faster?
Well, I think I'd certainly echo and also say many of the points that you guys have said as well. But I think charging and electric vehicles are a bit of a chicken and egg sort of situation. If you don't see the infrastructure, you don't see the point in having an electric vehicle. If you don't have the electric vehicles and the high utilization rate, then the economics of the charging hub don't necessarily make sense. So by that logic, these charging hubs will end up in more affluent areas. And that means that poorer neighborhoods will lose out. And those neighborhoods typically will have, they will be the areas that have had greater exposure to poor air quality. So if there is a way that we can make or achieve high utilization rates and make the economics work in areas where there has been really, really poor air quality, areas that have been really, really underserved, then I think that would make tremendous progress. But I think the second thing is that it's absolutely fine to have a charging hub, absolutely fine to think about commercial vehicles, but it has to be thought of in the same, you have to think about walkability, access, can you cycle there, all the other modes of transport as well in the same breath, I think.
There's a bit of a wildcard question that I'd like to ask you guys, but just before I do, guys, there's a microphone just by the camera in the middle here. I think we just about have time for 1 or 2 questions from you guys. If you have anything you'd really love to ask, feel free to jump on the mic and I'll come to you next. In the meantime, I'd just like to ask you guys about hydrogen quite quickly, because I know I have been skeptical in the past, but people who are smarter than me tell me that if it does have a future, it's in big commercial vehicles. What are your thoughts on that?
I live near a hydrogen filling station.
Oh, one of the 4?
Yeah, well, I think there's 12, but the one I live near is the NPL. It's behind a locked gate. It has a little queue that emerges from time to time when a number of the Toyota Mirais that use that location turn up there. There's a high-pressure system for commercial vehicles, a high-pressure system for domestic vehicles. It's kind of like the same technology we're dealing with electric. It's cool. It's got some potential. There's some interesting energy value chain questions. Do you actually get the right transition of energy if you create proper green hydrogen? Because blue hydrogen, meh, brown hydrogen, just don't touch it. You're basically burning fossil fuels worse than burning fossil fuels. So you've got to do green hydrogen. The energy it takes to get it into the car and get your 100 miles of driving doesn't look quite right for a regular, smaller vehicle. Heavier vehicles, possibly, particularly the guys that are going to do really long mileage, the trucks that come from Poland. You see them plowing up and down the M6. That could be an interesting space. But it kind of needs its own little Elon Musk moment. Hydrogen needs someone to champion it.
I think if it has a role, it's certainly with the HGVs. And I said that in a prior role, we tried to develop some projects. We at Osprey, we delivered a rapid charging hub in the centre of London in a multi-storey car park. But this is big infrastructure. The hydrogen filling stations, there's a lot of work there. The planning implications are far greater. So you're not going to have these stations everywhere. So I think it's going to be in dedicated sites and dedicated locations, and it's going to require a significant amount of involvement from government and above.
Well, the other thing is that obviously there needs to have the infrastructure for hydrogen, but there's actually a real shortage of HGV drivers. And that's partly because the lifestyle doesn't suit a lot of people, that you need to be away from home for a large number of days. And so there may be an argument that actually you are doing sort of shorter journeys, which maybe would be sufficient by electric. But I'm saying this is definitely not an expert in this particular subject. But the second thing is that also HGV drivers have to have breaks every 4 hours. I learned that from the lovely Volta man today. And so if you've got 45 minutes every 4 hours, do you need hydrogen? I don't know.
Tasty. Right, we've got a couple of minutes. Let's have a question from the gentleman over here, mate. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. My question's about the cost of electricity, and if we think that that is going to go up or down, how that impacts on the economics of investing in infrastructure for companies, fleets, etc., and whether solar and batteries would be a solution.
I'm happy to have a shot.
Jump on it.
I spent about 5 years forecasting energy prices for an energy supplier, and I was looking over a 25-year time horizon. The first thing I got wrong was I missed the solar boom, so I totally screwed that one up. Solar came in at a very, very low marginal cost. The second thing I'd observe is that wind power prices have started to go up to build new assets, which I think is quite interesting. The dynamic of the market's going to change. I think the cost will rise with a certain amount of inflation and raw materials based on the capital cost of building new infrastructure rather than necessarily the marginal cost of the fuel. The marginal cost of the fuel is going to go down over time. So there's a really awkward dynamic emerging in the energy market where it's going to fall to the long-run cost of building new infrastructure, which is a weird way of me saying that the power prices will be volatile, and I can't really answer your question. And over 5 years of trying to answer that question, I never got it right. So probably up slightly.
The fanciest I don't know I've ever heard.
I think the other thing is that there is not a charging network operator today that is making loads of profit. So to build the sites that you all want, which are large, multi-charger, high-power sites, you have to take a long-term view. It's a big investment, otherwise the site isn't worth building. And therefore, we've all taken that long-term view, and we've all built in, the risk of energy price rises. So it's not a case that, if the energy price goes up, will we stop seeing these charging hubs built? That's not the approach that's being taken.
And I think from a rival, we'd email these guys to help us answer that question.
Very happy to help.
I think we could squeeze in one more question. Gentleman here seems keen. Yeah, go on, by all means. We'll do you next, sir.
Okay.
Hello.
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 I'd just like to ask the panel what their thoughts were.
It's you. Hello.
Yes, hello.
The old bait and switch. Sorry, sir. We'll have you next. Go ahead.
Just ask the panel. There's, I think, on one of the Fully Charged episodes, they talked about the charging networks being subsidised by the governments to increase the spread of them, essentially. Is that something that they're working on here in the UK?
Any subsidies on the horizon?
So there's two areas where there may be supportive investment from government. So one of those is in the more rural areas. So there's a rapid charging fund to make sure that large charging hubs are being built in the areas where there aren't large populations that make those sites commercially viable today. Although I will say that was probably in a pre-pandemic world, whereas today, you know, the increase we're seeing in usage across the country is fantastic. So that's one part. And then there's the MSA discussion. And I think what's the best one-liner to close that off quickly is probably that we need more power being taken to the MSAs, and there's a question of who should fund that. So they're the two parts where the government are looking to invest to help the deployment of infrastructure. But in terms of the charging networks and the sites you're seeing off the MSAs, there's no government money going in there. No, there's no need. Again, there's hundreds of millions of committed pounds of money there. So the money's there, the power's there.
Let's have one more from the gentleman that stood at the first microphone here.
Thank you. So I was interested in how consumers are going to drive adoption or pressure adoption. You see everyone from the world and his wife kind of looking for, you know, a greenwashing at the moment. But, you know, consumers, are they going to then say, look, there's a sustainability value chain here, and when you come to the last mile, you're wrecking that, basically. So one of the examples that I thought of recently was estate agents. You walk down a high street, every estate agent is using, you know, minis or whatever else. You know, the first one to adopt, you know, EV charging, they're going to have a massive differentiator. So just interested in the panel's thoughts on how consumers are going to pressure brands or delivery networks to go green.
There was a comment on one of the panels earlier that was around the way that government contracts are issued and around the makeup of the workforce and the policies that are adopted. And I think that's the way this can make a difference, is when it starts to become a requirement for you to win business, to make profit, is that you have green fleets. I think that's when you'll see a sudden huge shift in the boardrooms. It's happening already today, but then that would further accelerate the change.
We're out of time, gang. Thank you so much for that. You know what they say, time flies when you're talking about the scalability of commercial EV infrastructure. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Can we have a round of applause for them, please?
Well, there it is. Thank you so much to my panellists for this stimulating discussion, and thank you above all else to the thousands and thousands of you, the Fully Charged subscribers, who joined us at Farnborough Airfield that weekend and made it so special. I already can't wait for the next Fully Charged outside. Please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already, and hey, why not leave us a 5-star review if you're feeling generous? You could even write a review and talk about how much you enjoy my smooth radio voice that I put on when I do these. I don't really talk like this most of the time. We're actually planning on releasing a few more of these discussions from the live show across Fully Charged Plus, and some will be available exclusively to our Patreon supporters and YouTube members, so do watch out for those over the coming next few weeks and months. Then there we have it. If you have been, thank you for listening.